Welcome to the second part of the Chapter 9 lecture. Another aspect of doing research is collecting and organizing the data. When you collect secondary data, it's commonly a real issue that you just get excited with your research and continue researching the process and really are very late when you start the writing process. The textbook talks about this a little bit and suggests that it's very important that you limit your research and begin writing at an appropriate time. It's dangerous to collect too much information and delay the writing. Secondly, the textbook talks about learning to take good notes, speed reading, and paraphrasing frequently when you take your notes. All of these things are good things to note when you are in the process of researching your paper. When you collect data through surveys, it's very important that you conduct frequent surveys in your college experience, and I'm suggesting that you will be doing that. So it's important that you're familiar with some of the survey taking techniques and suggestions in the textbook. So rather than going over them one at a time, I'm going to ask you to take a look at pages 152, 151, 152, 153, and take a look at the particular suggestions given to you about doing surveys. This will be valuable information for you as you continue in some of your classes. It's important to avoid data gathering errors. Data should measure what is intended to be measured, and we call this validity. If you intend to measure something, make sure that you are in fact measuring that particular thing. That's called validity. Use a pilot test to see if you are measuring what you think you are. If you can't replicate your research, then maybe you're not measuring what you think you are and you do not have valid research. There's another term which you need to be familiar. That is that data is measured accurately so it can be replicated, and this is reliability. Other people are going to be needing to replicate what you do to show that your research is valid. So be certain that your research is reliable and that what you test can be tested again in the same way and come up with the same results. Documenting sources of information is also very important in the research process. I suggest that every good student doing research take the following pledge. So, start with me. Hold your right hand up and say after me, I will never, never, ever, for any reason, present someone else's ideas as my own. Obviously, I'm trying to help you to avoid plagiarism. Once you've taken this pledge, then develop a system to keep track of your notes and of your sources. And as you do that very carefully and with good discipline, you will be able to avoid plagiarism and remember the things that you have studied and be able to cite where you received those ideas very clearly. See page 153 in your textbook for 4 very good arguments that will help you toward proper citation and avoiding plagiarism. Page 153. Also, just a reminder, we are using APA in the School of Business, and APA is our writing style that we use to document all of our sources and also to create a style for writing and the level of language that we're going to be using. So study APA. We will talk about that more as we progress through the course. Then we want to talk about arriving at the answer or the conclusion of your research report. 2 things to keep in mind. First of all, analyzing the data, and then finally interpreting the data. When it comes to analyzing the data, what we're talking about is the tabulation process of the data you have gathered, the measures of central tendency, correlation analysis, and other statistical kinds of processes and techniques. Most of these statistical issues are not within the scope of this course. And so it's not important for you at this point to really be able to analyze the statistical components of your research well, although you will be called upon to do that in other classes. But for this class, let me suggest to you it is more important for you to interpret the data correctly, and that's the second point in terms of arriving at an answer. Avoid common errors related to interpreting data. First of all, don't try to squeeze data to result in an assumed prediction that you have. If you think something's going to happen and you're gathering data for it, and then it doesn't happen just the way you think it is, some researchers can be tempted to try and squeeze that data in such a fashion that they still come up with their predicted response. Don't try to do that. Report what you see and analyze what you see and interpret it as you see it. That's the best scientific method you could follow. Secondly, trying to change the world with your research. You don't have to move the world. All you have to do is study to show your research and what you learned, and it may be just a small chink in new information for others to follow, but don't try to assume too much and don't try to change the world. We were particularly warned about this in writing dissertations when I was in my doctoral work. Many students did try to change the world and assumed that they could write a dissertation that would really amaze people and wow people. But they were the ones who bit off more than they could chew and sometimes did not finish their dissertation, were not able to finish their doctoral degrees. My professor advised me, take a reasonable question, resolve it, solve it, and report it in your dissertation, and then when you're finished with your doctoral work, go out and change the world. Thirdly, it's important to compare, to not try to compare something when there's nothing to compare. Some people try to find more in the research than they have found and try to conclude more than should be concluded. Don't compare things that are not comparable. Apples should be compared with apples, oranges to oranges, not apples to oranges. And also, it's important to not assume that there's a cause and effect relationship on something if, in fact, one does not exist. Be very careful trying to say that this occurs because of that when there may not be any correlation between the two. For example, someone was asked to study in a major city in the United States what was occurring that so many different fires were occurring in a given period of time. Buildings were catching on fire, and so this researcher went out and began looking at the reasons for this and trying to find a cause-effect relationship, and finally came to the city and reported, well, the reason that we're having so many fires in our community is because we have so many fire trucks. Obviously, the student was looking and seeing that at every fire there were a lot of fire trucks, and where there were no fire trucks, then there were no fires. So he was suggesting that they should reduce the number of fire trucks within the city, and by so doing they would reduce the number of fires. Well, that's not a cause-effect relationship. The student was simply trying to squeeze too much out of that research that should not have been assumed. Finally, conclusions should be based on sufficient evidence, and we get into trouble if we try to think that we can conclude more from what few results we have than we really should. Consequently, I'm suggesting to you that when you write your research report, there are a lot of different factors to take place and to consider. When you do so, do it thoughtfully, do it with discipline. Start your research paper early and in plenty of time so that you have the time to work through it and to work through errors or to work through problems that you have so that you can develop a strong research report of any kind, whether it be a proposal or whether it be an information report or whatever, so that those who are receiving the report are getting a good, objective, well thought out, and well concluded report. That will build your credibility as a business person.